And so on the morning of day 2, I'm just leaving the Glen Rosa campsite, which is amazing. Well worth going to Arran alone for the view. 5 a night. The only thing it has is toilets. Yep, but that's grand. That's all you really need. So day 2 of my Scottish Islands and Highlands tour starts with cycling back into the small town of Brodick from the Glen Rosa campsite. It's only a few kilometres, in order to visit the supermarket, pick up some supplies and hopefully get myself a decent breakfast before I set out on a fairly long cycle across the top of the island. My first mission was picking up midge repellent and tick removers, packing my fears in that case, and then up over what's called the String, which runs from Brodick across the centre of the island to the west coast. It's a fairly steep climb to a pass and then a descent on the other side. There is some fine views from the top, so do stop, but pretty light traffic when I was doing it. I think this was a Sunday morning though, and early in the season, so it could be a lot heavier later in the year. Then a fork off to the right, which will take me to my first stone circle, stop at a rather odd cairn, and then the descent towards the sea where this stone circle, or indeed cairn, is located. So this is Auchagallon cairn, beautiful view out over the coast, and its current form, it looks like a stone circle, but that's because the stones that formed it have mostly been removed, presumably ended up in local buildings and field walls. That's happened to quite a few cairns in Ireland as well, unfortunately. And then a very rough descent from the stone circle. Then a few kilometres of cycling south to go to Machrie Moor, and then this is the path that runs from the car park to the first of the stone circles. It's actually a long enough walk, so it's worth cycling it if you can, although it's quite a rough surface. I didn't know much about this at all before I visited. I just spotted it on Google Maps, but in fact it's a really big complex and very worth visiting. So with stone circles, one of the things I always do is see if any of the stones have an obvious correspondence with mountains in the distance, because it's a common theory, and it certainly seems to be the case with some of them, that there's a deliberate reflection of the surrounding landscape, and maybe those particular sites were considered special in themselves. Anyway, this one's very, very easy because if you look at the two kind of main stones in the circle, you've got to figure that's deliberate. I think those might be the Paps on Jura. I'm not too sure. I don't think it's Arran, but I'll have a look at my map and confirm or deny that. Could be that there's a solar event, like a sunset or a sunrise coming up over those between them. Don't really know. If you've watched any of my Irish coast cycle diaries, you'll know I love pondering the mystery of stone circles and Neolithic monuments. I think the fact that there's no written history just gives us the space to fill in with our imagination, so don't pay too much attention to my theories, in other words. Anyway, Machrie Moor, I discovered, was in fact a complex of no less than 6 stone circles, so it's really quite extensive. It's also interesting in that it appears they were built in wood initially, and only 500 years later or so replaced in stone. I've often wondered that with the places that have alignments, solar alignments like Newgrange, because that seems very hard to work out mathematically, but was it the case that they were originally built in wood, and then once everything had been lined up so it worked, they were then later replaced with stone? Anyway, more idle speculation from me on that count, but I believe that theory is not ridiculous. I've heard it given credence by actual archaeologists as well. Anyway, Machrie Moor is a very impressive set of stones altogether, with different types of rock being used for some of the different types of circles, and also these fantastic lichen growths. I'll give you a close-up later on of the lichen on the biggest of the stones.
Anyway, the unexpected size of this complex meant that rather than the 10 to 15 minute trip I'd envisioned, which I was going to follow with heading further down the coast to King's Cave, ended up being about an hour and a half to 2 hour visit. Here's that stone with the lichens. So a bit short of time, I instead headed north on the road that hugs the coast. I was caught by ferry timetables here because there's only 2 ferries that head north per week to Colonsay, so I had to either leave Arran tomorrow morning early or leave it another couple of days. So it was north along that road to the small village of Lochranza, where there is also a ferry that crosses to the Kintyre Peninsula. I decided to spend that night in the campsite that's in Lochranza. This was actually a good decision. It meant that I could also recharge my batteries because they have a little boaty there. And also I had to set out very early the next morning, so I wanted to be as near the departure point of the ferry as possible rather than having to cycle 10 or 15 kilometres. I had located a couple of good looking wild camping spots at that sort of distance. At least this early in the season, the traffic on the road running along that western coast was very light indeed. Only ran into a few cars, and it's a really pleasant cycle actually, because it's mostly a good road surface. You're mostly right by the sea as we are here, so you've got this nice view of the cliffs on one hand and then the beaches and the sea beyond on the other, over to the Kintyre Peninsula. So arriving at Lochranza, I saw the castle there. This is a great sunset view, by the way. We'll return to it later. Took a little trip around to try and locate if there were shops and things that were open. There weren't. It was a Sunday. Found the campsite and got my tent set up, and then discovered that there was in fact a community hub pub. So that's a pub that the community have opened by taking over a hotel that has closed down, and luckily got there 5 minutes before they stopped serving food. Then it was a return to the campsite, which has an absolutely stunning setting, as you can see, for a sunset, a good few midges again, and an eagle flying high above me in the sky that I failed to actually capture any footage of. Anyway, that's day 2 of my Scottish Islands and Highlands tour. Do give the channel a follow so you get the rest of the days, and give a thumbs up if you liked this video. Thanks.